Is Sadako Rising the worst licensed chapter ever released in Dead by Daylight? Ever. The worst ever. Now, in my thumbnail, it says worst chapter ever. I don't think it's the worst chapter ever. I'm sure there are probably, original killers chapters that are worse than she is. I'm sure a lot of people would argue like Twins is worse because you never see anybody play Twins and nobody cares. And I'm sure there's lots of arguments for that. But thinking about this killer, this chapter, I think this is the worst licensed chapter they've ever released. And I think there's probably an argument to be made for this being the worst chapter they've ever released, period. And I apologize for the green screen eyes. But that's life. She's got that blue tint, man. There's nothing you could do. So why? Why is it potentially the worst chapter ever released? Well, there's a number of reasons. Number one, let's talk about Dead by Daylight and player morale right now. Player morale in Dead by Daylight is at an all-time low. It's bleeding players. Now, I'm not on the side of people that believes that this game is ever going to die. It's never going to die. This game is never going to be in trouble. The only thing I could ever see happening is if somehow one of these competitors comes out and goes nuts and becomes the next big thing. You never know what's going to happen, because if you had told somebody when Fortnite first came out and it was just some weird like Borderlands knockoff, nobody would have told you when that game came out that one day it would become the biggest video game of all time. Or maybe not of all time, but definitely the biggest video game in the world right now. Nobody would have guessed that. So I can't see the future. For all I know, the Texas Chainsaw game is going to come out and it's going to take the world by storm and it's going to kill Dead by Daylight. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. It could happen. Now, having said all that, the game player morale is at an all-time low. And so what usually happens in this game is that player morale starts to dip. They come out with a cool new chapter and player morale goes up. People get mad. They're like, oh man, this game sucks. The balance is bad. There's so many bugs. I'm mad. I want to rage. I want to break something. And then behavior goes, here's a Resident Evil chapter. And we all go, what? Nemesis and Jill and Leon? What? And we forget. We forget about all the problems that this game has. Behavior distracts you with this shiny new thing. And this time, they came out with a chapter that flops on so many levels. Number one, at the worst time, player morale is already super low. And then they come out with this chapter, which is an IP that not very many people care about. Sorry, Ringu fans, but it's true. Even if you think that the Sadako is cool and this whole chapter is awesome, most people don't care about this. And I would argue, by far, this is the least popular licensed character they've ever released. Without question. She's not even close to any of the other licensed characters they've released. The only character they've released that's licensed that I think is potentially not as popular as her or even close to is Pinhead. And I still think Pinhead is miles ahead of her. And the worst part is they released the original version of her. The vast majority of people who know this character know Samara, the American version from the Ring movie. The vast majority of people recognize that version. This is the source material version that not as many people are as familiar with, which, I mean, they're nearly identical anyway, but there's some differences. The Ring version is way creepier because the little girl and she looks like all gross and she's wet and her skin's all messed up and she's scarier. So that doesn't help. But then On top of all that, at the end of the day, even if you release a chapter that's not all that popular, because the argument could be made, hey, what about their original content? Their original content is just new stuff that nobody cares about because it doesn't have a history. And people can still get excited about that. Well, the problem is, this character, not only are they not a very popular licensed character, even if you throw that out the window and say that doesn't matter at all, she's not good. She's not a very powerful killer. Her mechanics are not very fun. It's not like, that's not to say her mechanics suck and are terrible to play against. They're just not like, oh, wow, this is so cool. Like, there's nothing, it doesn't add anything super unique to the game. She's kind of a hybrid of multiple killer powers that already exist. She doesn't add anything new in that regard. And then the perks aren't any good. None of the perks, I think, are going to be game changers. The two best perks on both sides, which is Call of Brine, in my opinion, Call of Brine and Empathic Connection, are both two perks that are good, but they're not meta. They're not going to shake up the meta. And they certainly don't add anything new to the game in terms of gameplay like, boon perks did. So this is such a poorly timed chapter. A license nobody cares about. That's going to tilt people, so I'll say most people don't care about. The killer's not good. The killer's not very fun to play against. And the perks aren't any good. So everything about this chapter is kind of a flop. And like I said, it comes in at the worst possible time. It comes in at a time when the player base is declining. Content creators for this game are leaving left and right. I've already seen that Scott Jund is taking a full-on break from the game. He's not even going to play it anymore for quite a while. Ots Darva's taking a break from the game. Now, it seems like he's taking a break because he's playing Elden Ring, which is hot right now. And then he'll probably come back. But the fact is, you have some of your biggest DBD content creators taking prolonged breaks from this game, and the player base itself is dwindling. And then you come out with this, and nobody cares. I don't know what this means for the future of the game, but it's not good. It's not a good thing. And that's why I think it potentially qualifies this chapter as being the worst licensed chapter ever released. So, hey, let me know in the comments what you think and whether or not you think this is the worst licensed chapter ever released, whether or not you think this is the worst chapter, period, ever released, or if you think Sledge is completely out of his mind and the game is thriving. Let me know in the comments. Tell me what you think.